G'day, I'm Sean and welcome to the CarExpert podcast. We've got a bit of a different show this week. Jade's away, so we've got Jack Quick back on the couch. He's filling in. How are you, Jack?
Hello, I'm good, thanks, Sean. Thank you for having me yet again, and hello to everyone at home.
Yeah, and
quick question, actually. Sorry, I know you're trying
Scott's
to introduce
here,
us.
so anyway, yeah.
Hello, already interrupting Sean. Do you get out of the right lane after you've overtaken someone, or are you like Jade and do you hover in the right lane?
I get out of that right lane as soon as I can. I am very diligent when it comes to that. I hate when people do that, so I try my best to not.
Either a good driver or watched our previous podcast.
I think, let's go with he watched the previous
Yes,
one, and
exactly.
he's a good driver. He did both, and so should you. Before we jump in, I just want to give a shout out. A couple of weeks ago, we put a call out about if anyone could do the math on how much fuel you could get if you bought a Nissan Patrol over a Land Cruiser 300 series. Bailey Young on YouTube came to our rescue with these stats. $40,000 could buy you 20,618 litres of fuel.
It's enough to get your XR8 home.
It's just about. And that could drive the Patrol around 143,000 kilometres, based on the average fuel price of $1.94 from August 2023. And then Ali on YouTube jumped in to add a little bit extra to say that 143,000 kilometres is the equivalent to driving around Australia about 10 times.
Now, I'm no great mathematician. That is incredible math.
That is amazing.
That is really, really useful.
And that was quick. They came back with a response really quickly on that.
So that's deeply impressive. Thank you very much for that. But even if you had a caravan on the back, maybe you're a bit of a lead foot and the fuel consumption isn't quite at the average, that is a lot of petrol you can buy by going for a Patrol instead of a Cruiser, and you're less likely to have to wait.
And look, I don't know how many people want to drive around Australia 10 times.
Certainly
let's
not
say you do
continuously.
Let's just say you do it 5 times. You've still got a 20 grand to spend on nice hotels and treats. And then someone else actually pointed out, and I didn't note down their name, so I apologise to you if you're watching. That doesn't take into account the equivalent amount of fuel you would use in the Land Cruiser either. So,
oh, that's really true, yeah, because that just gets you to the purchase price of the Land Cruiser. It doesn't include the diesel, which is cheaper at the moment but can be more expensive than petrol.
Or the 4-year wait for a Land Cruiser. So
there's that as well.
So let's dive straight into it. A bit of news out of Sweden/China this week. Volvo have announced that they're going to stop making diesel vehicles in their passenger cars. Obviously, they're still going to make diesel trucks. That would be silly. But the diesel passenger cars are going to stop altogether. And I think this is starting to become a bit of a trend because we saw Hyundai used to have a pretty popular i30 diesel. It did sound like a truck, but they dropped that a few years ago. Volkswagen don't sell a diesel Golf in Australia anymore. So it seems like more and more passenger cars are moving away. And Scott, I think you actually wrote a bit of the story on this one.
Yeah, so Volvo is a bit ahead of the curve on this front. It's actually announced it's going fully electric worldwide by 2030, and in Australia it's going to be sooner than that. So it's no great surprise, but we are seeing more brands move away from diesel because I think the reputation's taken a big hit on the back of Dieselgate in Europe. Volkswagen for a very long time touted it as the answer or the future, and when that name was really heavily tarnished, brands don't want to be associated with that. But also, we're seeing in some classes of car, modern petrol engines are just as efficient as diesels on the highway and are nicer to drive in the city. With that said, I don't know that I want a petrol in everything. In my big 4-wheel drives, I still want a diesel engine because they're relaxed and torquey.
I know I feel that way about the Sportage in particular. I'm not a huge fan of any of those petrol engines, especially that turbocharged engine. I know that's mainly transmission related, just with the dual clutch, but I love, as Scott said just then, that effortless highway cruising in a diesel engine, and even more so in European SUVs as well.
I think it's also worth mentioning that in Australia, where our fuel isn't all that incredible, the quality of it, a modern diesel engine, depending on the exhaust treatment and that sort of thing, is potentially as clean as an older petrol engine because the quality of our diesel fuel is quite good. The quality of our 91 RON petrol is not great. So it's obviously car dependent, but a modern European diesel with exhaust treatment and that sort of thing is potentially cleaner than an old petrol engine car, despite diesel being seen as the dirty fuel.
I think the thing to keep in mind, the Utes are going to keep using diesel. Obviously, large SUVs are probably going to keep using diesel. The reason that Hyundai and Volkswagen stopped doing it because people that buy those cars are not doing big miles in Australia, unlike Europe where they might be on autobahns. And I think that's probably the same with a lot of Volvos. You go out to the bush, you don't see a lot of Volvos you see a lot of old Volvos on the road, but you're not seeing brand new XC60s and stuff frequenting the rural highways. So I guess it makes a lot of sense that city buyers don't really need diesel, do they?
Well, I think hybrid is also a big part of that answer. I mean, if you look at a Volkswagen Polo or a Mazda 2 or something like that, for a little while you could get a diesel. I know in the Mazda CX-3 you could up until very recently. But in a lot of those cars now, the diesel engine that was the efficient option has been replaced by a hybrid or a mild hybrid, which is much nicer to drive, doesn't sound like a truck when you turn it on, and offers some extra performance when you put your foot down. So Toyota has really led that charge, but for cars that are living mostly in the city and are smaller, all of a sudden there's an alternative to diesel that is going to save people money at the pump, has some real environmental credibility for the brands. Whether or not that is deserved is another question. And yeah, potentially going forward is going to offer better resale than diesel as it gets phased out.
Where do you think, Jack? Do you think this is going to affect, especially rural buyers potentially? You think this is a problem for them, or do you think a lot of rural buyers are looking at petrol cars now anyway?
Yeah, well, I think of my mum in particular. She purchased a CHR back in 2017, and she wasn't worried about whether it was petrol, diesel, and things like that. But I do also have a lot of friends that do some serious Ks, and they're looking at things like diesel Santa Fe's and the like. So
just for context, Jack, you grew up on a farm.
I did, yes. If you didn't know, and if I haven't told you already, you know now.
Yes, we asked him to take his Cooper off for this one, but he normally wears one around the office. It's kind of funny. This story actually came out, and the same day the British Prime Minister came out saying that he wants to push back the petrol ban. So initially, Boris Johnson, the previous Prime Minister, hashtag Brexit, he put in a ban of petrol cars in London by 2030. And now, correct me if I'm wrong on this one.
You were practicing this before the podcast.
I was. Rishi Sunak?
I think Rishi Sunak, but
Rishi
very close,
Sunak.
yeah.
He's trying to delay it. Again, I think you wrote the story on this one, Scott.
Yeah, so it's now come out that this is going to happen. It's been officially reported.
Official.
Yes, and this is on the back of the UK pushing back a number of its climate policies, not just to do with cars. It's still planning to phase them out, but it's looking like 2035 now instead of 2030, which will align the UK with Europe, ironically enough, when you mentioned Brexit. I think the fear from the government and also from car makers before these bans came in is that it's going to punish lower income earners. If you start removing really cheap petrol and diesel options and there's no electric replacement, all of a sudden people hold onto cars for longer, they're in less safe cars, and potentially they're emitting more because their 10-year-old car is much dirtier than a new one. I think also that there is a fear that maybe the charging network's not going to be ready. This is pure speculation, but Boris Johnson made some big claims about how much they were going to spend on charging infrastructure and how many chargers they were going to have, and whether or not that's going to be borne out remains to be seen.
I think for me, I'm going to look from a different perspective, and I suppose I'm kind of looking from the bad guys' perspective. But like the manufacturers, if this target is continually moving, and say, for example, I know that you said that this UK is now aligning with the EU, but if it goes beyond 2035, and the car makers were planning to only have EVs by that stage, they've spent all of this money developing and ramping up these production plants, and I suppose in a sense that cost is going to be passed back onto us as consumers, which is unfortunate if that is the case.
It's really interesting. Jaguar, which is probably the first brand that comes to my mind when I think of British car brands, even though it doesn't sell in huge numbers in Australia.
Or it's not owned by the British anymore either.
Well, there's that as well. Yeah, it's owned by Tata. Jaguar has announced that it's going fully electric. It started phasing out its petrol new cars. The F-Type's going. I wonder if it would have phased that out as soon as it is had it known 2035 was the time in the UK instead of 2030. Maybe it would have, but...
I mean, the development cycle in a car is generally 7 to 10 years, so they're looking at that sort of timeline anyway, I'd imagine.
But it is... The decisions governments make do have an impact on car makers. We've seen it in Australia with the slow rollout of electric cars, and then now in Europe with it planning to ban petrol and diesel sales. Car makers are going, well, we're going to have to stop selling them and start developing electric cars. I wonder if maybe that decision in the UK did impact the timeline that was set by British car makers, and whether there's some frustration there that now those goalposts have moved, but they've already started pouring money into it.
So where does it leave us in Australia? I don't think there's really any firm policy on this sort of...
Yeah, it's still a couple of 14-hour flights away.
Yep. Okay, so let me ask you guys, and I'll start with you, Jack. Where do you think we should, as a nation, as Australia, where do you think we should go? What direction, and I guess a timeline? What should we be looking at?
Oh, I don't know, actually.
Jack's now the Prime Minister.
Yes.
You're in charge.
Listen, everyone. I really like, given Australia is so large, I think having a large selection of petrol, diesel, hybrid, electric, fuel cell, all of those, giving us the option right now would be good. I don't know if I have a time frame in my head, and I don't know at this stage, what would suit best for Australia. My partner has a Tesla Model 3 and he can do a lot of travelling around Australia in that, but that's not the best solution for everyone. And it's a really, really complicated
Well, how does it work with your Tesla at the moment? So your family's farm is what, 4 hours from Melbourne, where we are now?
Yep.
How does it work when you take the Tesla?
Yeah, so we have to charge up. It's 4 hours away, halfway to Adelaide, and we just for safety's sake, we charge up in Ballarat just to have that peace of mind.
And how long does that take roughly?
15, 20 minutes, half an hour. It's like a top up. But then once we get to the farm, we don't have enough to turn around and come back. So we've reached the point of no return, and we have to charge up just with a power point out there, and that takes 15, 20 hours or less than. It all kind of depends how much we charge up at Ballarat, and to then do the reverse on the way back to Melbourne. So it's a bit of a process, but it's not the end of the world.
I think you're onto something really clever there, because although we don't make cars in Australia anymore, so whatever technology comes, we're taking it. We don't have a choice. But I think car makers are going to start seeing Australia as a mix of somewhere like Europe and the US, which are going electric, and then somewhere maybe like South Africa, where the market's not quite as developed, there's less infrastructure, and we still need diesel and petrol.
And they don't have consistent electricity.
Well, there's that as well,
which is a real problem.
Which, depending on where you are in Australia, is also an issue.
Yes.
I think we sit somewhere in the middle, and provided there are some brands still offering options for people who need to go long distances, tow big, heavy things with diesel power, we're in a pretty good spot.
Cool. Well, I'd like to know what you guys at home think about this. Do you think that we should be sticking with diesel? Do you think we should be phasing it out? Do you think we should be having a stronger push towards electric? Leave a comment, let us know. We'll move on to the next topic now. Jack, you've been away on a few launches recently.
Yeah, I've been around town, up, down, turn me around. It feels like for the last little bit. I'm finally back in the office for the first time in a little bit.
You say that like you didn't come in complaining this morning.
Yes, you've frequented the Melbourne airport quite a few times the last couple of weeks, but there's one particular one I'd like to talk about. It's the Volkswagen T-Roc City Life you went to drive in Sydney City last week.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the T-Roc City Life is a new special edition, if that's what you want to call it. It's very conceptually similar to the Tiguan All-Space Adventure, where it's a special edition that's going to be in the range for a few months. This T-Roc City Life will be offered into 2024, so it's not going away anytime soon. But this new T-Roc variant forms as a new entry-level variant to the range at the enticing price of $36,990 drive away, reading my review from my head.
Directly out of a Volkswagen commercial, the enticing price.
Hashtag not sponsored.
No, absolutely, yeah. This undercuts the existing style, which recently got a few spec upgrades. So this is the complete bone, bare stock, whatever entry-level point.
Given we're talking about the T-Roc, but that's a kind of new Volkswagen name, where does it actually fit in the context of the range? Is it a Golf replacement? Is it Tiguan sized?
Yeah, so it's technically a Golf-based SUV. The platform it's based on is Mark 7 Golf. So
the last one.
Yeah,
so
the
it's
old
old
one.
yeah,
Yep.
okay.
So it sits in between the T-Roc. Sits in between the T-Cross, which is what Volkswagen now dubs the entry-level point to the range, not
That's the jacked up Polo.
The Polo,
Yeah.
and then the Tiguan is just that bit larger than the T-Roc.
Yeah, so City Life in the name, very much what they're aiming at with this. The thing that, and we'll come back to the City Life. I just wanted to make a point here of Volkswagen also unveiled the new Tiguan, the next generation Tiguan, and it looks exactly like the T-Roc as far as I'm concerned. We'll put them side by side on the screen now. Having just spent a few days with a T-Roc and then seeing the new Tiguan, how did you feel about it?
I have to somewhat disagree, just a smidge. I don't think they look necessarily identical. I think the Tiguan definitely looks, the new Tiguan that is, looks a lot like the ID4.
I totally agree.
Round, sort of ambiguous. Yeah. It is an SUV.
Yes, it is
I don't know if I'm the biggest fan of it.
4.5 metres worth of car.
Yes, and it has 5 seats. And
The interesting thing, and we just spoke about how Volkswagen dropped diesels, there is no other engine options. It's just a petrol engine with it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what we know at this stage. Yeah.
So yeah, Volkswagen in Europe has done some pretty advanced plug-in hybrids on the new Tiguan. You can get 100 k's of range. It's got DC fast charging. And VW initially, sort of late last year, early this year from memory, said that we'd get that in Australia. It's now said we're only going to get 2 petrol engine options. They make 150 and 195 kilowatts. It seems that Volkswagen thinks the market has gone past plug-in hybrids. It also could be down to the fact they're going to struggle to get them from Europe. It might be a combination of the two.
Yep. Okay, so so conflicting results, and especially, and we'll touch on this later in the podcast, another major manufacturer disagrees completely with that,
Yes.
But we will get to that. So just on the city life, how was it actually driving around town in that thing?
Well, it's funny because the city is where it feels the most relevant and best where it would be to drive. Technically, it only has a torsion beam rear suspension, so it's less sophisticated than a multi-link setup, which you can get in the higher spec T-Rocs. But I couldn't tell that it was torsion beam. It was really, really comfortable. It handled all speed bumps and pimply city roads like nothing. And I think that's also due to the fact that it has smaller 17-inch alloy wheels with a really chubby tyre. So it's really soft and supple in urban environments.
There you go, Volkswagen. Feel free to use that. Soft and supple. The new T-Roc City Life.
1.4 litre petrol, 110 kilowatts, 250 newton metres. This is a base engine, but in my experience, basic Volkswagen engines punch above their
They
weight.
normally ripper little engines, aren't
They're
they?
great, yeah.
I love that engine. Lockie, my partner, had it in his Golf before he stepped up to the Model 3, and it continues to be a fantastic engine. Apparently, it's almost 12 years old now, but it's still a fantastic engine. Torque, all the torque is available from 1,500 revs, so like you
put your foot down, it's just there and ready to go.
Effortless, really effortless, and super economical as well. Across my testing with the T-Roc City Life, which included a lot of city and like outer suburbs and a bit of spirited driving too, just for measure.
To translate from motoring journalist speak, spirited driving means?
Gunning it through through some twisty turns in a national park just on the outskirts of Sydney for that particular launch. But yeah, I averaged 6 litres per 100 Ks, which is under the claim from memory. I think it's 6.3, but I've experienced that engine in a whole heap of Volkswagen Group cars, and you see a lot of 5s and maybe even like high 4s if you're really, really hypermiling it on the freeway too.
Okay, so it's a good thing. So would you say, out of looking at the smaller Volkswagen groups, would you say T-Roc's actually kind of pick of the bunch now, or would you still be more inclined to look at either a Golf or a Tiguan?
I would. That's a tricky question. I don't know exactly, but I think I have a friend that's currently looking for a small SUV, and I was pointing them towards the T-Roc. I don't know if I'd go for it myself because I think I want just that little bit more size. I didn't love the second row. I thought it was a tiny little bit cramped. The boot was fine, but I think just having that peace of mind and extra space, I'd be going for maybe a Tiguan, or if I had to choose, I'd want a Golf wagon, but okay. I can't get it anymore.
You can't get that, as we spoke about recently.
Yeah.
Scott, what about you? Where would you land?
I'd have one over a Golf.
Yep.
The new Golf looks much flashier inside and outside. It's got that really incredible dual screen setup, but I find it harder to use. I also think the new Golf is expensive. Mm-hmm. Volkswagen has just killed the base model in Australia, so we've now only got a more expensive starter. When you look at what you get in the T-Roc, with the exception of some safety equipment I know you've mentioned in your review, you get pretty much everything, but it just feels a bit more conventional, and I think it's priced better.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, we'll put a link in the description to Jack's T-Roc City Life review if you want to read it. Leave a comment and tell him how good of a rider he is. I do have a quick question for you guys. I know I struggle to find time to really do anything outside of work. How about you? Do you have much time?
Even at work sometimes.
Even at work. Do you have much spare time outside?
Not a heap, no.
So how would you find time to make it to different car dealers? If you want to look for a couple of different cars, would you be able to actually have time to do that?
I think I'd struggle. And I actually know from trying to help family members, these dealers aren't open on Sundays for the most part. No. So the one day I do have to play with usually, you can't do it.
Well, thankfully, online they are open 24/7, and we have a great way to actually help you find a deal on a brand new car. Head to Google, type in Help Me Car Expert, and we can take all the hassle out of traveling around to dealerships. We've put it all in one very convenient place. You'll see some great pictures of Paul, and he can help you find a new car, lock in a great price, and connect you to a dealer to get that into your new car quicker. So head to Google, type in Help Me Car Expert, and if you do buy a car through there, leave a comment. Let us know, what did you buy and how was the experience? Okay, so big news this week, guys. Ford did what we've all been expecting for a while now and announced a hybrid Ranger. But it wasn't just a hybrid Ranger like Toyota have said, a hybrid Hilux.
But not a hybrid Hilux.
This is actually a hybrid. It is a full plug-in hybrid Ranger. Details are still a little murky. We're not sure what specs it's going to come on yet. We're not sure pricing. But Scott, tell us what we do know. What do we know about it?
So we know it's going to be here in 2025, here being Australia. We know it's got about 45 k's of electric range, and we know it's got a 2.3 litre petrol engine under the bonnet, which is shared with Mustang, old Focus RS, kind of, and then the Volkswagen Amarok.
And it's a ripper engine.
It's a great little engine, yeah. Beyond that, we don't know a heap, but we do know that Ford has focused on making it still have the same capability as a diesel Ranger, which means it should be comfortable off-road, it's going to be able to tow, and it's going to have a decent payload.
Well, they're talking 700 Newton meters.
Which is a heap of torque. It's more than you get even from the V6. I think the challenges they're going to face, and maybe part of the reason we haven't heard more about exact payload and towing figures, is weight. Obviously, when you add a big battery, you add a couple of 100 kilos of weight, and that then potentially comes out of the payload or the gross combined mass, which is relevant to the towing capacity, obviously. So it's going to be interesting to see how Ford manages to balance the electric capability with what you would expect of a ute. But based on what we can see, it's sort of a halfway house between something like the mild hybrid Hilux and then a fully electric ute like a Silverado EV, designed to be the best of both worlds. I'm not sure I actually want it though, and I'm curious to know your thoughts.
I kind of see this from the perspective of my dad, who's a farmer. If I've already spoken about it, but I'm from a farm.
You're from farm, Jack.
Yeah, funnily enough. He's always talking about going off-grid, and he loves the fact of he wants to put up solar panels, battery packs, and I think having a plug-in hybrid Ranger or something along the like, he always says, "Oh, Jack, I want an F-150 Lightning," because he'd be able to use the battery pack as like a vehicle to home, to load whatever, to power whatever he needs out doing whatever he's doing.
He's out building a fence, you need an angle grinder or something. You don't have to have a noisy diesel clattering away, so that'd be a nice change.
Do we think 45 kilometres is going to be enough for the average ute buyer to actually use the electric power properly? Because that's always my problem with plug-in hybrids. You're always carrying around the battery and you're always carrying around the petrol engine, but it's rare you're actually using both to their full capability.
I think that depends on how they tune it, right? I know recently I spent some time in an Escape plug-in hybrid and it was not very good. In terms of a plug-in hybrid.
It's also going from Australia now. It's been booted.
Thankfully. It was terrible. It just didn't use its electric capability very well compared to something like an Outlander where it can actually...
It feels like an electric car when you...
Yeah. So I think that depends on how they tune this thing, right?
Yeah, I feel quite similarly. I imagine a lot of Ranger owners currently load their Rangers up to the wazoo and they're towing a whole heap of whatever. I'm wondering if it will ever be able to use the electric motor, or if that'll be enough to get things actually moving, and if it'll be considerably less than 45 k's, and then what is the point besides being a mobile power station?
What I can think of is, you talk 700 Newton meters. If you are towing a 3.5 tonne boat or caravan or whatever it is, having electric power off the line is going to make it significantly easier to get it up boat ramps and get it off the mark, because that is obviously where electric motors do their best work. I think it's also going to be interesting off-road. What we've seen from some of these off-road utes is that they can use their electric motors to do things like tank turns and sort of have crazy torque vectoring. I wonder if Ford is going to lean into that with the electric motor in the Ranger and actually give it more ability off-road than the petrol has, or the diesel.
That sounds like a Raptor Fev to me.
It does sound like a Raptor Fev.
Yes. Well, look, Ford aren't the only ones playing this game. LDV have their fully electric T60.
There's also a new LDV four-wheel drive ute coming to Australia next year, which looks fantastic.
Way too expensive
It's called the GST in China.
Yeah, right. There's be a lot of that when you actually buy one here. I think that's the problem, though. The T60 is, as near as makes a difference, $100,000. Best guess on this Ranger is probably going to be up around that sort of price as well.
Given a wild track's what, 75 or 80?
Exactly, Platinum's 85. Chevy have their electric Silverado, as you mentioned. Yep. Ram have one. Ford have their F-150 Lightning. So this is a thing, and it is coming. I'm curious from you guys. I know neither of you are tradies, but do you think there is actually a future, a solid future in electric utes, or do you think that the ute will die when the diesel dies?
This comes back to the conversation we had at the start about fit for purpose. There are definitely people where a diesel-only ute is the only option, but if you really think about what most people do with their utes around Melbourne, where we all are, and around the capital cities in Australia, yes, some of them go into the wilderness on the weekend and tow, but there are plenty that just go from work site to work site in the city and barely go above 40 k's an hour. So I think it comes back to the diversity of options. There's plenty of people which, an electric ute makes a heap of sense, but we just need to keep a diesel option there as well in case you need to go further.
What about you, Jack?
Well, I think a lot of lower spec FEV utes would make a lot of sense, especially in when they're just sitting there for a mobile power station. A lot of the similar reasons that I described that my dad would want it. I find it really interesting that Ford has only chosen to show off a dual cab version. I think it'd be cool to see if it's possible. I don't know whether a single cab FEV would be really cool. That really entry level, and I don't know if that's possible or would it be financially viable given Ford wants to recuperate the cost.
It does do a very basic version of the F-150 Lightning in the US. It's sort of aimed at, people who want to use this for work, not for play.
Well, every council you see, every council worker, they're all driving around in what's essentially a workmate version of the F-150s over there.
They're also the people, when I say them, the council workers, fleet drivers, that sort of thing, they're the people that actually probably right now electric and plug-in hybrid power is best suited to because they know exactly what they're going to do every day.
Well, also they have to. There's a lot of push for government agencies to actually reduce their emissions, and the obvious reduction of emissions is to move into something that is hybrid, which there isn't an option. And so I guess that's the thing. The T60 being $100,000 is not a viable option for councils to fit out their crews with.
Not for all councils, no.
But if you have a Ranger XL in single cab or even like a super cab version with FEV, the guys could sit there all day with their stop-slow signs, running on electric power. They still have their tunes going. Their pie warmer will still work.
It'll work better, I would say.
But they're not going to have to run around in a diesel all day. I mean, it does seem kind of crazy that, and again, we're talking dual cab, they marketed with what looked a lot like a wild track. Yep. Why we're not seeing this push from them to lower-end utes for this sort of stuff?
It's all down to money.
Yeah.
Ultimately, a Ranger Wild Track or a Toyota Hilux SR5 or a Navara Pro 4X, all of those top-spec utes, they are a license to print money for car makers because ultimately underneath it's a ladder frame chassis vehicle. It's got some nicer leather and materials in it, but it's built by the same people in Thailand as the cheap ones. And the cost to make it look and feel nice is much lower than, you would expect. There's huge profit margins in them. So if they're trying to recoup the cost of these batteries and that sort of thing, the development going in, they're going to go to the higher end where the margins are so fat they're not getting cut completely.
All right, so question to you guys. Would you rather a FEV ute or a fully electric ute?
I'm going fully electric.
Fully electric, Jack?
I want full electric because I know in Victoria right now with a road user charge, you have to pay to use the petrol engine or whatever engine.
The hybrid,
you have to pay for a plug-in hybrid.
So regardless of whether you're using electric power or petrol power, I just go all electric in that sense. I don't really get the point. And I kind of hate that law or rule.
Very silly. I do see you in a Hummer EV though. I can definitely see you getting around to one of them.
How many times would he have to charge on the way to the farm in his 4.5 tonne Hummer ute?
Yes, but he could load his Jimny in the back and take it with him. So.
That'd be fantastic.
All right, guys, we'll move on. We're very close to the end here. We're going to talk about our picks of the week. So I'll throw straight to Jack as he's our special guest. What did you see this week that caught your eye, mate?
Yeah, so throwing it back to the 1980s, setting the scene. You might...
And how many decades after 1980s?
Were any of us born in the 1980s?
I think I was the closest.
There you go.
Jack was definitely the furthest away.
Honda had this really cool foldable scooter that went into the back of a little hatchback called the City, which was new at the time. It was called the Moto Compo. And you see a lot of them around at Cars and Coffee shows and things like that, where people get them out and go for a little zip around.
It was essentially a suitcase with a motorcycle inside, right?
Yes, absolutely. So Honda has chosen to reinvent that for the modern day. It's called the Moto Compacto, and it is an all-electric version of this. It's like a revival of sorts, retro more than anything, of this original Moto Compo from the 1980s, and it looks very cool to me. It folds in. When it does, it looks a little bit like a MacBook charger. It's just a white square, but then it all pulls out. There's a handlebars, seat, and the wheels all come out and things like that. It's very similar to it's just an e-scooter essentially. It has around about 20 k's of range and a top speed of about 25 k's an hour. So you're not going to be going anywhere quickly or very far, but it's enough that's a really viable last mile solution. And unfortunately, this one hasn't been designed around a car this time. It's just being sold alongside the electric SUVs and only in the US for now.
Disappointing. That said, there seems to be quite a vendetta against electric scooters in this country, which is a real shame. But you never know, Jack. We'll put it on your Christmas wish list, and one day it might be fulfilled.
I'm going to think really hard, and hopefully it happens.
All right, Scott, what's your pick of the week?
Not even remotely close to what Jack's was.
Not an electric scooter. How
No,
interesting.
funnily enough, but it does have eco in the name. It's Thailand's Super Eco, and it's a racing series that has popped up on my Instagram, which is a whole lot of basic Suzuki and Honda hatchbacks by the looks of it, going absolutely flat out around a track. At one point, they're 5 wide. And the commentators, I don't actually speak Thai, so I don't know what they're saying, but they sound really, really excited.
Ty Martin Brundle and Ty David Croft screaming.
I'm assuming at some point one of them goes through Goes Hamilton very excitedly. I want to do something like that. It looks like low-cost, affordable motorsport, and it has eco in the name, which means we can get funding.
Oh, well, I might have something for the weekend.
Yes.
A very,
you've
very
told me
cheap
about your
version.
plans.
Yes. So keep an eye out, subscribe, and you might see us go very cheap racing. My pick of the week, this is a big shout out to some Swiss German-speaking university students from ETH Zurich. They built their own little electric car. It kind of looks like halfway between a Formula Ford and a go-kart, with the intention to break the world record to go from 0 to 100.
It might as well be break their own ribs and ruin their internal organs. It's that fast.
So the previous record was 1.4 odd seconds.
Slow.
Look, that is Stone Age compared to what these guys...
What are you doing?
These guys set out 0 to 100 in 0.956 seconds. Starts with 0. It's more than half a second quicker than the previous record.
This is a proper record as well. This is not that
Guinness World Record.
It's not that US thing they do where you have a 1 foot rollout or anything like that.
Where Bugatti sets a record and then they go, no, but we went faster. We weren't filming.
So there's no rollout, there's no cheating, there's no way to make the machine, look or feel better. It just is standing still and then snap your fingers and it's doing 100.
Yeah, it is.
It's insane.
Out of this world.
That is crazy.
Yeah. The girl who drove it, she took her helmet off and her skin was all peeled back here. I think it's settled back now, but
the wind will blow and she'll stay like that.
Yes. It's a phenomenal thing to watch. So I think that's really cool. We're not going to see that in a road car anytime soon, but I think it's really cool that there are people out there pushing the boundaries to break those sort of limits. It's something that they did in the 50s and the 60s and it sort of died off.
I want to know what needs to happen now to go faster. Because we have now reached a point where there's not much faster you can go, short of teleporting.
There was no rocket. This is purely an electric motor and very powerful.
Something with a skeleton made of steel.
The car with the person weighed 180 kilograms.
Wow.
So the only thing you could do is lessen the weight and I suppose bigger enthusiasm.
A positive attitude gets you a long way.
Vibes.
Yes. Well, that pretty much wraps up the podcast this week. Jack, thanks so much for filling in for Jade this week. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you again, Sean.
And Scott, any final thoughts you want to leave us with this week?
No, not really. If you think you can go from 0 to 100 faster than that, please call us. I want to drive your car.
Yes, write to us at imalunatic@carexpert.com.au. But no, if you do have any feedback, we'd love to hear it. Send us an email, podcast@carexpert.com.au. If you haven't already, subscribe, give us a like, leave a comment. And next week, Jade will be back. Just a reminder as well, there's a link in the description for the event that Jade is putting on in Melbourne here. You get tickets, they are free, and you're going to see a few of these guys there and a few pretty cool new cars. So make sure you get your tickets for that. Until next week, guys. Jack, thanks for coming along. Scott, as always, good to have you here. And thank all of you for joining us. We'll see you next week.